Some stories begin with a crime. This one begins with a piece of homework. Notes from the Last Row is the kind of psychological thriller that slowly gets under your skin. What starts as a teacher recognizing an unusually talented student soon turns into something far more disturbing. A dangerous game of curiosity, manipulation, and obsession. And the deeper they go, the harder it becomes to tell who is actually controlling whom. If you enjoy psychological thrillers, twisted characters, and stories where one small decision slowly spirals out of control, help push this video to more people by hitting the like button. It really helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let's get into notes from the Last Row. To get revenge on his teacher, he actually set his sights on the teacher's wife. Even more outrageous, he also became infatuated with his classmate's mother. The first time he visited his classmate's home, he secretly opened the other's mother's private drawer. The private items inside were suddenly laid bare before his eyes. Unable to look away, he immediately set his sights on her clothes. Just as he was about to bring the clothes closer and smell them, the classmate's mother suddenly appeared. Lee Kang awkwardly tried to make excuses, but to his complete surprise, this kind of boundary-crossing behavior did not make the woman angry or blame him, but instead she kindly treated him with courtesy and even took the initiative to keep him for dinner. Even though the classmate's father was a famous writer, he had no heirs at all and was very polite to Lee Kang. Little did he know that all of it was just a facade. Before Lee Kang left, he accidentally overheard the couple's true feelings. The words rose to his lips, but he swallowed them back. Instead, he admitted openly that he only hoped his son would make more outgoing friends. But the father also had practical reasons for welcoming Lee Kang. He believed his son was at a critical stage, with a programming competition coming up later. If Lee Kang could help him, and his son managed to place in the competition, it would greatly benefit his future job prospects. But instead of feeling disappointed, instead of backing away, Lee Kang became even more determined to stay close to the family. He often spied on his classmates' parents flirting with each other. Even more absurdly, Lee Kang even used what Professor Heo Mun-oh had taught him about literature, turning his voyeuristic material into serialized fiction written into his homework. But to his surprise, Mun-oh didn't expose him. Instead, he developed a thrill from peeping into other people's secrets. Little did he know he was falling deeper into the abyss step by step. What follows is a dark revenge story packed with psychological twists. Until the very last moment, you will never guess the real reason behind this revenge. The story begins with the down-and-out professor Heo Mun-oh. He had once published a successful novel, but after finishing just one novel, but for the next 20 years, he failed to produce another book. He became harsh and sharp-tongued. Years of frustration left him insecure, bitter, and deeply jealous of more successful writers. Until one day during class, he was interrupted by Lee Kang, a student who always sat in the back row. Lee Kang pointed out his mistakes in public to get his attention. The homework Lee Kang handed in afterward showed even more astonishing powers of observation. Lee Kang's story was drawn from the daily life of his classmate Kim Se-yeon's family. After reading it, Heo Mun-oh was completely drawn in. That day, Lee Kang, who was working part-time, accidentally saw the wallpaper on a customer's phone. He was instantly captivated by the woman on it. After learning that the woman's son Se-yeon was in his class, a wicked plan immediately took root in his mind. He deliberately showed off his programming talent to lure Se-yeon in. Sure enough, just as he expected, Se-yeon, who loved programming, took the bait at once. He took the initiative to invite Lee Kang to his home for guidance. Soon, Lee Kang stepped into Se-yeon's large villa. It was the first time he saw Se-yeon's mother in person. She was far more beautiful and stunning than in photos or his imagination. When he looked at the family photo of 4 on the wall, envy washed over him instantly. He even imagined himself as Se-yeon in the photo. The first story ended here. Heo Mun-oh's wife, Jo Hyun-suk, was a psychologist. After watching, she exclaimed that Lee Kang's mind was distorted. But Mun-oh did not take it seriously. Just as he was about to return to his room, Mun-oh suddenly acted like a shy young woman. He bashfully hurried away. He, who never took disciples, for the first time considered taking Lee Kang as his student. The next day at school, he found Lee Kang alone. He told him that no matter what difficulties he faced, he should not give up writing. He even made an exception by offering one-on-one tutoring. But Lee Kang turned him down on the spot, saying he needed to earn money through part-time work. Refusing to give up, Mun-oh humbled himself further and promised to pay Lee Kang the same wages he would earn working. When Lee Kang heard that, he burst out laughing in disbelief, mistakenly thinking Mun-oh was gay. Mun-oh sneered, then continued trying to persuade him with reason and appeal to his emotions. In the end, Lee Kang agreed to Mun-oh's proposal to study one-on-one at his home. But what Mun-oh didn't know was that this decision would ultimately bring total disaster upon himself. Seeing her husband so enthusiastic, Jo Hyun-suk was both surprised and delighted. Soon after, Lee Kang arrived at their home. But he brought bad news. The previous day, while secretly watching Se-yeon's mother at Se-yeon's house, he had been caught outside her bedroom. At the time, nothing was said, but after dinner, he happened to overhear Se-yeon's parents talking. Only by winning the programming competition could he stay by Se-yeon's side as a teammate. Otherwise, he would be completely pushed out of this family. Lee Kang's programming skills were only slightly better than Se-yeon's, so he had no confidence in winning. All of his writing inspiration came from spying on the Kim Se-yeon family. Once he was kept at a distance, he would have no more creative material. After hearing this, Mun-oh was momentarily at a loss. Sensing Mun-oh's curiosity, Lee Kang pushes him to steal the programming competition questions. He claimed that as long as he helped Se-yeon win the prize, he himself would be able to stay close to this family and gather material. At first, Mun-oh flatly refused. But thinking about how he had cherished his dream of being a writer for 20 years, and all his submissions had disappeared without a trace, while his rival Kim Soo-hun from the same period had achieved fame and success, he could only remain stuck as a lecturer in the literature department of an ordinary university, living his whole life in frustration and jealousy. Coupled with his curiosity about the subsequent story, he ultimately crossed the moral line. Under Lee Kang's step-by-step guidance, he secretly copied the exam questions from Professor Piao's computer. The moment he walked out of the office, Mun-oh felt extremely excited inside. Even though it was the first time he had done something like this, he surprisingly felt not a trace of guilt. His face was filled with excitement and relief. This was the first time in his life he clearly realized that crossing the moral line could also get him what he wanted. Not long after, Lee Kang and Se-yeon successfully won an award. But what puzzled Mun-oh was that, even though they clearly had the answers, Lee Kang and the other only got second place. After that, Lee Kang's answer made him see him in a new light. From then on, Lee Kang kept creating, and the one-on-one tutoring also began that weekend. Before long, Lee Kang finished his second assignment. Mun-oh couldn't wait to read it. This time, Lee Kang finds the opening he has been looking for. He learned from Se-yeon that his mother, An Yoon-ju, favored white roses, so he spent a large sum to buy 3 of them. At the dinner table, Se-yeon's parents happened to learn about Lee Kang's background. When he was 8 years old, his mother ran away from home, and his father has long suffered from dementia, living in a nursing home. Lee Kang lived in a rented room, going to school and working part-time while taking care of his father. Se-yeon's parents were deeply moved by what they heard and told Lee Kang to treat this place as his own home from now on. From that day on, he fully became part of this big family. And this was the small door Lee Kang had wanted to push open all along. After Jo Hyun-suk learned that her husband had secretly copied the exam questions, the two got into a heated argument. Jo Hyun-suk stormed off in anger. But just as he was about to go to sleep, Mun-oh realized his mistake and confessed everything about the stolen exam questions. He also said the thrill of crossing the line felt especially exciting, a feeling he had never experienced before. Jo Hyun-suk never expected that crossing the line had given her husband an unprecedented sense of relief. She decided not to question him further and changed the subject. The couple had been sleeping in separate beds for 13 years. When Mun-oh heard this, he was filled with guilt. After that night, Jo Hyun-suk, in noticeably better spirits, prepared breakfast for Lee Kang, who was about to come over. Soon enough, the doorbell rang. The thoughtful Lee Kang brought 3 red roses. This was the first time since Jo Hyun-suk got married that she had received flowers from a man, and her heart was filled with mixed emotions. To find out what the two were doing, he quietly walked to the study door and listened in. Mun-oh curiously asked Lee Kang whether the narrator and the author in his assignment were the same person. Lee Kang turned the question back on Mun-oh. He then brought out Mun-oh's only published novel, The 12 Women. By now, the book could only be found in secondhand bookstores. Mun-oh was reluctant to discuss the book, but he couldn't resist Lee Kang's curious pressing. Just as Lee Kang was about to keep asking, Mun-oh shut his mouth and refused to say more. Before class, Lee Kang brought some good news. Seyun's father insisted on inviting him to move in and live with the family. For Lee Kang, this would let him save on rent and gather material for his writing up close. For Lee Kang, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Mun-oh told him to first observe Seyun's father carefully. Lee Kang happily agreed. Early the next morning, Lee Kang moved into Seyun's home. When he learned that from now on, he would be using Seyun's older sister's room, he felt very uneasy about it. At his insistence, he moved to the attic piled with goods. Faced with such a considerate Lee Kang, Seyun's parents were full of relief and approval, but the housemaid Schwan-san Min-hui was full of resentment. After Lee Kang moved in, her workload increases noticeably. She was full of displeasure and even made things difficult for him in every way. When delivering food, she deliberately knocked over the juice and spilled it on him. One day, while reading, Lee Kang happened to overhear An Yoon-ju scolding Seon Min-hui for throwing a cigarette butt into the flower bed. Even though Seon Min-hui refused to admit it, An Yoon-ju was certain that he was the one who did it. After An Yoon-ju left, to vent her anger, Seon Min-hui blew smoke at An Yoon-ju's favorite flowers. She deliberately blew smoke at the blossoms An Yoon-ju loved most. When Lee Kang saw this, he was completely shocked. When Seon Min-hui turns around, she realizes Lee Kang has been watching her. Instead of looking embarrassed, she becomes even more brazen. That same night, Lee Kang overheard Seon's parents struggling with the decision to fire Seon Min-hui. While Kim Soo-hun was massaging An Yoon-ju, the mood between him and An Yoon-ju suddenly turns intimate, and the two of them went into the room together. Lee Kang tiptoed to the door to eavesdrop. When Mun-oh found out, he scolded Lee Kang harshly, warning him not to spy on others anymore and to only observe quietly. But while they were eating KFC, Lee Kang made a flattering remark. The remark immediately reignites Mun-oh's anger. Mun-oh, seething with irritation, immediately got up and left. But the moment he returned to his study, he pressed himself against the door to eavesdrop again. To his horror, Lee Kang had told his wife everything about the backgrounds of the 12 women. He recounted it all to his wife. Frightened, Mun-oh rushed out the door. Jo Hyun-suk seemed to realize something, and her expression suddenly changes. Lee Kang's spying continued. One day, he happened to see An Yoon-ju pull the expensive scarf he had lost out of Seon Min-hui's bag. Lee Kang watches her take the missing expensive scarf from Seon Min-hui's bag. The two got into a heated argument. When Seyun and his father returned home, Seon Min-hui immediately offered to resign. However, what he did not know was the scarf in her own bag had actually been planted there deliberately by Lee Kang, all to get revenge on him for looking down on him. When Mun-oh learned that Lee Kang had deliberately framed the housekeeper, and then remembered how he had discussed the novel with his wife, he was immediately overcome with rage. He decided that from then on he would only teach at the school and no longer give private tutoring. Just then, Lee Kang revealed a secret. That day, Father Jin braved the rain to urge Seon Min-hui to stay and keep working. But the way the two acted made them look like a couple playfully bickering. After that, Father Jin dragged Seon Min-hui into the garage. Lee Kang quietly followed them. He actually discovered that the car was shaking non-stop. Mun-oh saw how convincing his act was, and his anger instantly surged. Faced with Lee Kang's excuses, Mun-oh was so furious that he drove him away. That night, when he got home, he told his wife that Lee Kang was deeply twisted inside and that he planned to stop the tutoring. But before he even finished speaking, Lee Kang, on the other side, arrived at his front door holding a blood-stained hammer and began pounding frantically on the door. Just then, Mun-oh's phone suddenly rang. It turned out that all of it had only been a nightmare. The caller was none other than Lee Kang. Lee Kang sounded urgent, saying that he had been in a car accident. He begged Mun-oh to come over. Soon, Mun-oh rushed to the accident scene. But to his confusion, Lee Kang had not been in a car accident at all. He had deliberately tricked him into coming out just to share a shocking secret. But Mun-oh was not interested at all and immediately turned to leave. Lee Kang tried to stop him from leaving, but that only made Mun-oh even more disgusted. Mun-oh then announced that their lessons were over. Just as the words left his mouth, a car accident suddenly happened nearby. Both of them were horrified. Lee Kang looked closely and realized the person hit was Seon Min-hui. Before Mun-oh could even react, Lee Kang spotted someone else he knew. Mun-oh followed where Lee Kang was pointing, and his whole body froze instantly. Mun-oh never would have imagined that Se-yeon's father was actually his old rival from his university days and his love rival. It turned out the father Kim in Lee Kang's story had all along been the person he knew best and hated most. Mun-oh witnessed Seon Min-hui being hit in the car accident, while his sworn enemy Kim Soo-hun was standing nearby. The scene before him left him shocked. While taking Lee Kang back to school, he pressed him on why he had not told him sooner who Se-yeon's father was. But Lee Kang did not know the famous writer Kim Soo-hun at all. After returning home, Mun-oh could not sit still. He immediately pulled out Lee Kang's assignments, and fury instantly surged through him. It turned out that the father Kim who kept appearing in the writing was Kim Soo-hun, and from that, he concluded that Kim Soo-hun's wife, An Yoon-ju, was the woman Mun-oh had secretly loved for years back in college. The memories instantly came flooding back. Mun-oh clearly remembered that in college he had once worked up the courage to confess his feelings to An Yoon-ju. But the moment An Yoon-ju spotted Kim Soo-hun, she abruptly left Mun-oh and ran straight over to the other man. Her eyes and heart were completely full of Kim Soo-hun. From then on, Mun-oh lived with that regret for the rest of his life. Now, looking back on it, his emotions could not settle for a long time. But in an instant, that feeling was replaced by hatred. Determined to uncover the whole truth, the moment class ended the next day, Mun-oh went to find Lee Kang and made him explain in detail the past entanglement between Seon Min-hui and Kim Soo-hun. A dejected Lee Kang then pulled out the next assignment and admitted that this was his last assignment. After saying that, he turned and walked away. Mun-oh couldn't worry about everything else for the moment. He eagerly flipped through the contents. At the dinner table, the housekeeper's hand accidentally brushed across the master's back. This ambiguous moment was caught right on the spot by An Yoon-ju. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But the next second, the housekeeper seems even bolder. Right in front of the mistress, she locked eyes with Kim Soo-hun, turning the seduction up to the fullest. Her fingers once again slowly brushed down his back. At that moment, An Yoon-ju concludes that her husband is having an affair. She could not accept the reality and hurriedly rushed into the bedroom. She swallowed a pill to calm her nerves. Just as she was about to wash her face to steady herself, she spotted a bag beside the toilet out of the corner of her eye. She picked it up and looked. It turned out to be torn open pregnancy test packaging. She concluded it belonged to the housekeeper. To confirm her suspicion, she secretly searched the other woman's bag on the spot. She was surprised to find her own missing expensive silk scarf stashed inside. She kept digging, and the pregnancy test suddenly appeared right in front of her eyes. Just then, the housekeeper walked in. She quickly hid the pregnancy test and forced herself to act calm. Not wanting to alert the housekeeper, she only brought up the expensive silk scarf. Seon Min-hui looked completely confused and claimed she knew nothing about it. Yet the lady of the house, An Yoon-ju, refused to let it go. While they were arguing, Kim Soo-hun and Se-yeon come home. Seeing this, Seon Min-hui got angry, and in her fury, she quit on the spot. Afraid his secret would be exposed, Kim Soo-hun hurries out after her in the rain and begged Seon Min-hui not to leave. As he begged and pleaded, he got bold and pulled her into the car, continuing to plead desperately. That night, An Yoon-ju, unwilling to let it go, pressured her husband to fire the so-called thief, but her real aim was to cut off their relationship. Her husband gently refused. Faced with his defense of Seon Min-hui, An Yoon-ju was burning with rage. To protect her family, the next morning she went to Seon Min-hui's place. She got straight to the point, showing the pregnancy test. Seon Min-hui was shocked when she saw it, but once she learned An Yoon-ju had stolen it, she became surprisingly calm. The word auntie instantly enraged An Yoon-ju, but she still forced herself to hold back her anger. An Yoon-ju had not come simply to start a fight. She wanted Seon Min-hui to back away from her husband. But what An Yoon-ju never expected was that Seon Min-hui would flatly deny everything. Seeing that An Yoon-ju did not believe her, Seon Min-hui swore a terrible oath on the spot. She swore that if even one word was a lie, she would be hit by a car the moment she stepped outside. That very night, Seon Min-hui really was struck by a car and died on the spot. When An Yoon-ju heard the terrible news, she was shocked and terrified. But what was even more baffling was that when her son Se-yeon heard about it, he collapsed straight off his chair onto the floor, his whole body convulsing as he went into a stress-induced fit. Could the baby in Seon Min-hui's belly have been Si-yoon's? Kim Soo-hun and An Yoon-ju mistakenly believed their son simply couldn't accept reality, since Seon Min-hui had worked for their family for quite a long time. But right after Kim Soo-hun comforts An Yoon-ju, Lee Kang inadvertently noticed what looks like a strange smile flash across Kim Soo-hun's face. And that is where this installment ends. Mun-oh, full of curiosity, went out of his way to the convenience store where Lee Kang worked so he could learn the truth as soon as possible. He apologized for getting angry earlier and for bringing up the idea of stopping the lessons, hoping they could continue. After getting a satisfactory answer, Mun-oh immediately revealed the real reason he had come. He wanted Lee Kang to investigate more deeply what exactly had happened between Seon Min-hui and Kim Soo-hun before the car accident. That night, Mun-oh and his wife were having dinner with Professor Park and his wife. Before long, Lee Kang sent over his latest assignment. Ignoring everyone else's mood, Mun-oh couldn't wait and hurried off alone to the bathroom to look at the contents. Following Mun-oh's arrangement, Lee Kang went to the hotel the next day to investigate Kim Soo-hun. But because the hotel strictly forbade leaking guest information, he could not get what he wanted. He came up empty-handed. Just as he was about to leave in disappointment, he happened to run into a hotel employee he knew from a part-time job. From him, Lee Kang learned a shocking truth. On the night of the incident, the hotel employee was heading home from work, and he saw Seon Min-hui arguing intensely with Kim Soo-hun. The moment the words were out, Seon Min-hui charged toward the road. But the very next second, a sudden tragedy left the hotel employee horrified. He looked back at Kim Soo-hun and saw him frozen in place, pacing helplessly. The hotel employee also revealed that Kim Soo-hun was a regular in the hotel suites, checking in 3 or 4 times every month, and he always booked the same room. His spending pattern was extremely unusual, always the most expensive red wine, paired with cheap ice cream. When the hotel employee entered the room, the scene before him was a real eye-opener. Clothes were scattered everywhere. Curious as he would also often eavesdrop outside the door on the upbeat music inside. When Lee Kang heard this, he scoffed. The hotel employee then told Lee Kang that on the day of the incident, the sounds inside the room were completely different. Just as Mun-oh was anxious to hear what happened next, his wife suddenly called. He impatiently hung up right away. But just as he hung up, Professor Park called. Left with no choice, he had to suppress his emotions and answer. Mun-oh intended to brush the man off, but to his surprise, he learned some shocking news from him. He hurried back. It turned out Professor Park and a few others had run into Kim Soo-hun by chance. While they were chatting, Kim Soo-hun casually mentions that his wife, An Yoon-ju, was Mun-oh's junior at university. Seeing Mun-oh's reaction, Jo Haeon-suk, standing nearby, immediately senses there is more history here than Mun-oh ever told her. She brings up his past in front of the others. Mun-oh's expression changed drastically. He went home and harshly accused his wife of embarrassing him in public. But Jo Haeon-suk shot back at him, asking why he had hidden his history with An Yoon-ju. Mun-oh immediately flew into a rage, smashed some things, and then shut himself in his study. Mun-oh shuts himself in his study and keeps reading Lee Kang's assignment. That day, the hotel employee did not hear the lovely music. Instead, he heard the two of them arguing about something and threatening each other. He thought the trail would end there. But just as the hotel employee was about to leave, he suddenly remembered that the previous night, someone around Lee Kang's age had come to the hotel and also asked him about what had happened before the crime. Lee Kang was instantly confused. But what the hotel employee said next makes him uneasy. After Mun-oh finished reading, he immediately fell into a chain of associations. In a daze, he felt as if he were standing outside the hotel suite door. But the moment he opened the door, he suddenly found himself in Kim Soo-hun's garage. Right in front of him was the car. It was shaking in place without stopping. Curious, he leaned in to take a look. Mun-oh suddenly woke with a start, so it had just been a nightmare. But his curiosity only grew stronger. That very night, he called Lee Kang. He urged him to find out who that young man was as soon as possible. But before he could even finish speaking. Meanwhile, late that night, Se-yeon suddenly sat up in bed. He walked over to the bookshelf in a daze. He pulled out a book. After flipping through a few pages, he violently tore it to pieces. Once his emotions had calmed down a little, he called his sister. And the book he had just destroyed was his father's most famous work. From this, Lee Kang concluded, that the young man who went to the hotel to ask around That was Se-yeon. Mun-oh was only half convinced. Lee Kang went on to talk about Se-yeon's recent strange behavior. Not only had he been shutting himself in all day, but even when Lee Kang called him to eat, he was driven off with angry shouting. But the strangest thing was Se-yeon's relationship with Kim Soo-hun. At the dinner table, he always glared at Kim Soo-hun with a vicious look. Even more suspicious, at Seon Min-hui's funeral, the normally cold Kim Soo-hun took the initiative to pay for the entire funeral. Hearing all this, Mun-oh concluded that Seon Min-hui's death was no accident and had to be connected to Kim Soo-hun. Not long after, Lee Kang got the hotel surveillance footage through the hotel employee. Although the face was not clear, judging by the figure, it was enough to confirm the mysterious young man was Se-yeon. Next, he only needed to find out what Se-yeon knew. Before long, Se-yeon's sister came back. Lee Kang overheard the siblings' conversation. Se-yeon plans to expose what he believes is his father's hypocrisy and affair on their father's birthday, but his sister strongly opposed it. She was worried that if this got out, their father's reputation and career would be ruined, and she could be dragged into the scandal too. Seeing Se-yeon crying uncontrollably, his sister slaps him. To force Se-yeon to reveal the secret, Lee Kang suggested. He suggested having An Yoon-ju confront Se-yeon in order to uncover the truth, but Mun-oh immediately rejected the idea. That same night, Mun-oh was drinking and chatting happily with Jo Hyun-suk when he suddenly received a multimedia message from Lee Kang. Completely ignoring Jo Hyun-suk's feelings, he walked straight into the study. Faced with Mun-oh's coldness, Jo Hyun-suk looked utterly helpless. Mun-oh immediately called Lee Kang and asked what it was. It turned out An Yoon-ju had recently received an anonymous letter, and without thinking much of it, she handed it to Kim Soo-hun. Kim Soo-hun's expression changes the moment he sees it, and Lee Kang caught the whole scene. He then slipped into the study and discovered that Kim Soo-hun had shredded the letter. That showed just how important the letter was. After Kim Soo-hun leaves, Lee Kang gathered up the shredded pieces of the letter and took them with him. Back in his room, he pieced them together bit by bit. The result shocked him. The letter reads, "I have the hospital surveillance footage. Tonight at 10 o'clock. By the fountain at Songchang Park." Mun-oh immediately judged that this was Se-yeon's doing. He told Lee Kang to rush to Songchang Park right away. By the time Lee Kang arrived, it was already 9:57. He stood at a high point and scanned the area. He quickly spotted a flustered Kim Soo-hun, along with the figure of a masked young man. Meanwhile, Mun-oh waited and waited, but never got a call back from Lee Kang. He called every half hour, but no one ever answered. Before he knew it, it was already the middle of the night. Just as he was tossing and turning, unable to sleep, suddenly, the doorbell rang. The visitor was none other than Lee Kang. Mun-oh hurried to open the door. Afraid his wife would hear, he quickly signaled Lee Kang to keep quiet. Then he led him into the study. Lee Kang revealed a shocking twist. It turned out that just an hour earlier, when he saw the young man trying to flee, he immediately ran after him. The moment he pulled off the other man's hat, he froze completely. The mysterious young man turned out to be... What neither of them knew was that everything was being watched by Jo Hyun-suk outside the door, who saw and heard it all. Why was An Yoon-ju secretly investigating? What was the masked figure really after? After Mun-oh learned the truth, he could hardly believe it. And what shocked him even more was that the secrets An Yoon-ju knew far exceeded everyone else's. Just as Lee Kang was about to reveal more of the truth, he suddenly received a phone call. His expression changed instantly, and ignoring Mun-oh's pressing questions, he hurriedly rushed out the door. From that night on, Mun-oh could no longer reach Lee Kang. Worried about what would happen next, he was restless all day long. About a week later, Lee Kang finally called, when Mun-oh learned that he was at a care facility. Taking care of the man he claimed was his seriously ill father, he felt too embarrassed to ask about what had happened. Lee Kang said he would need about a week. He said he would send the assignments over gradually. Then he hung up the phone. Very soon, the first assignment was submitted. Mun-oh even skipped his class because he couldn't wait to read the content. It turned out An Yoon-ju had already noticed that Seon Min-hui and Kim Soo-hun had an ambiguous relationship. She had even discovered Seon Min-hui's positive pregnancy test. But she didn't make a huge scene. Instead, she directly took the test and confronted Seon Min-hui with it. What surprised An Yoon-ju was that Seon Min-hui not only calmly denies the accusation, but begins revealing damaging information about Kim Soo-hun. Hearing that, An Yoon-ju was full of doubt. Just as Mun-oh was deeply absorbed, the story suddenly cut off. It left him feeling unbearably curious, like a cat scratching at his heart. Left with no other choice, he began imagining the rest of the story on his own. Son Min-hui told An Yun-ju that she once had an older sister who passed away from cancer the year before. It was only after the funeral that Son Min-hui learned her sister had always dreamed of becoming a writer and had left behind a complete novel manuscript. After reading it, Seon Min-hui suddenly came up with a money-making plan. If she sold the manuscript to a publisher, she would surely get a considerable payment. That way, she could give her daughter a better life. At her daughter's suggestion, Seon Min-hui asked Kim Soo-hun to deliver the manuscript to the publisher for her. But what she never expected was that after getting the manuscript, Kim Soo-hun kept putting it off, claiming he was too busy. Sensing something was wrong, Seon Min-hui decided to play along. Hearing that, Kim Soo-hun's expression immediately changed. He smiled and claimed he would handle it soon. Not long after, Son Min-hui accidentally discovered that the content of Kim Soo-hun's newly published book was exactly the same as her sister's novel. It was obvious that Kim Soo-hun had stolen the original manuscript. She immediately took the new book and angrily confronted Kim Soo-hun. But he was utterly shameless, refusing to admit it no matter what. He even threatened Seon Min-hui, saying if she had proof, she should bring it. Just as he was about to leave smugly, Kim Soo-hun's face suddenly changed. He grabbed Seon Min-hui, who was about to leave. From then on, Kim Soo-hun was completely in Seon Min-hui's control. At the dinner table, Seon Min-hui's touch was not seduction, but provocation. To Mun-oh's surprise, the continuation Lee Kang later sends is almost exactly what he had already imagined. The possibility that his lifelong rival Kim Soo-hun might be a plagiarist fills Mun-oh with barely concealed satisfaction. Just as he was getting worked up, a mysterious man suddenly barged into his wife Jo Hyun-suk's office. When she saw who it was, Jo Hyun-suk was full of confusion. Soon after, Mun-oh received his third assignment. When Seon Min-hui saw that An Yun-ju didn't believe her husband was a plagiarist, she immediately exposed the choke marks on her neck. It turned out that the day Kim Soo-hun went out in the rain, he wasn't trying to convince Seon Min-hui not to quit. He forcibly dragged her into his car. He tried to choke her. That was when An Yun-ju fully believed it. To protect her husband's reputation, she immediately promised to pay Seon Min-hui a large sum of money to buy the original manuscript of the novel. But the next day, An Yun-ju suddenly received the devastating news that Seon Min-hui had been hit by a car and killed. She was instantly horrified. An Yun-ju sensed that the accident was not accidental. To find out whether her husband was responsible, she went to the hotel with her face covered to seek clues from the hotel employee. Although it was confirmed to be a car accident, she still had lingering suspicions in her heart. The next morning, she went alone to find Seon Min-hui's daughter. After some coaxing, the naive girl handed over the USB drive containing the novel manuscript. To keep her family safe and stable, that same night, An Yun-ju burns the USB drive. But the story was far from over. After reading it, Mun-oh was furious. Not long after, Lee Kang sent over the fourth assignment. The truth flipped once again. As it turned out, on the night Seon Min-hui was attacked, Se-yeon had been at the scene. He witnessed Kim Soo-hun trying to steal the USB drive from Seon Min-hui's bag. When he found it wasn't there, Kim Soo-hun snuck into the hospital and finished Seon Min-hui off with his own hands. When An Yun-ju learned the truth, she was overcome with grief. She never imagined that her husband was not only a thief, but also a murderer. Once she calmed down, she decided to team up with her son. She planned to thoroughly investigate Kim Soo-hun's background. Using an anonymous letter, she pressured Kim Soo-hun to meet at the park at 10 that night. But just as An Yun-ju arrived at the park, Kim Soo-hun suddenly got a call from his daughter. For the sake of her own future, the daughter chose to betray Se-yeon. Kim Soo-hun hung up the phone and rushed straight to his daughter's place. An Yun-ju tried to go after him, but was stopped by Lee Kang, who had been following close behind. This was the whole secret behind An Yun-ju's disguise and secret investigation. Mun-oh suddenly realized that An Yun-ju was in danger. He immediately called Lee Kang, hoping Lee Kang would protect An Yun-ju. But at that critical moment, Lee Kang chose to walk off the job. Before Mun-oh could press for an answer, Lee Kang hung up the phone. But what he didn't realize was this. From that moment on, Mun-oh is no longer just reading the story. Without realizing it, he has started writing it himself. To create the ending he had envisioned, he couldn't help but write feverishly without stopping. By the next morning, His version of the story was finally complete. Mun-oh held the book, what felt like the second major story he had written in his life, filled with excitement. Just then, Lee Kang called again. The moment he answered, Lee Kang started scolding him. It turned out he had called more than a dozen times the night before, but no one had picked up. When Mun-oh asked what was going on, he never expected what he would hear next. The ending Mun-oh has imagined is even darker. To cover up all his secrets, Kim Soo-hun brutally murdered Shai-woon and An Yoon-ju, and even set fire to the house. But when Mun-oh rushed over, the scene before him left him completely baffled. Not only had no fire broken out here, but Kim Soo-hun and his family of 3 appeared before him completely unharmed. Mun-oh froze on the spot. On his way home, he tried calling Lee Kang to get to the bottom of it, but no one answered the phone. Furious, he had just reached the downstairs of his building when he ran into Lee Kang. The moment Lee Kang saw him, he turned and bolted. Mun-oh chased right after him, but he lost him at the intersection. He suddenly realized something was wrong. At that moment, back at home, his wife, Jo Haeon-suk, was packing her bags, getting ready to go back to her parents' house. When Mun-oh got home and saw this, at first he had no idea what was going on. But when he saw the couple's meal set on the coffee table and the messy bed, it all suddenly clicked. His wife had betrayed him and gotten together with Lee Kang. He was just about to demand an explanation when it turned out that the mysterious man who had barged into his office the day before was none other than Lee Kang. Lee Kang had exposed everything about Mun-oh's obsession with spying on Kim Soo-hun's family, spilling it all out. When Jo Haeon-suk learned the truth, she felt completely devastated. The situation between Jo Haeon-suk and Lee Kang is presented in a way that sends Mun-oh's jealousy and paranoia over the edge. Watching his wife walk away without looking back, Mun-oh, completely betrayed, fell apart. But bad news kept piling up. Professor Park suddenly called to tell him that someone had anonymously posted on the school forum, exposing everything he had done. The obvious culprit was Lee Kang. Mun-oh didn't know what to do. He wanted to use his novel to prove his innocence, only to find that the manuscript had already been stolen by Lee Kang. Rage instantly consumed him. Even now, Mun-oh still couldn't understand why Lee Kang was determined to destroy him completely. As public opinion boiled over, Mun-oh was fired by the school board. From that day on, he never recovered. He spent his days drowning in alcohol. Then one day, Lee Kang suddenly sent him a text message telling Mun-oh to check his email. The email was titled, "The Final Assignment." When Mun-oh opened it, everything changed. Lee Kang's ultimate goal for revenge finally came to the surface. It turned out that 12 years earlier, after Mun-oh and his wife failed at IVF, they went to an orphanage out of compassion and offered free psychological counseling to the children. 8-year-old Lee Kang was withdrawn and refused to accept counseling. He ran out the door, and Mun-oh followed him. Then he talked with the boy, offering him comfort and guidance. Lee Kang came to see him as a trusted idol. In order to stay in touch with Mun-oh, Lee Kang asked Jo Haeon-suk for their home address, planning to write to him in the future. When Heo Mun-oh learned that his wife had given Lee Kang the address, he immediately made his displeasure clear to her. Little did they know that their conversation was completely overheard by Lee Kang, who was hiding in a corner. Lee Kang realized that his pain was merely cheap material for someone else's creation, and his self-esteem was completely destroyed. Hatred took root and began to grow inside him, and he silently planned his revenge, waiting for the right opportunity. 12 years later, Lee Kang successfully got into the university where Mun-oh taught. By chance, he overheard a conversation between Se-yeon and a classmate. Lee Kang was overjoyed and immediately began to use the same methods to pay the man back in kind. He deliberately got close to Se-yeon and used the opportunity to step into her life. In fact, there was never any nanny named Seon Min-hui. That accidental car crash gave Lee Kang the idea. In his story, he deliberately fabricated the character Seon Min-hui and used it to point every bit of suspicion toward Kim Soo-hun. What made Mun-oh's skin crawl even more was this. Lee Kang had no parents to begin with, and the father he claimed was seriously ill was actually the former director of the orphanage. Under his step-by-step manipulation, everything that happened afterward was written by Mun-oh himself, word by word. That was the whole truth behind the revenge. When Mun-oh learned all of this, his face filled with shock. He couldn't believe it. He felt an unprecedented humiliation over his own foolishness and arrogance. Only now did he understand that the one truly being manipulated was himself. Mun-oh's story ended there. At the end of the series, Mun-oh opened a secondhand bookstore. His greatest hobby remained writing. One day, a customer came in to buy a book. Mun-oh looked up and saw Lee Kang, whom he had not seen in a long time. A surge of overwhelming hatred instantly rose in his heart. Mun-oh's face twitched for a moment, filled with fear and unease. But after a brief moment, a hint of hope appeared in his eyes. Lee Kang, still in shock, wore a strange smile. Notes from the Last Row is a Korean psychological suspense series loosely based on the Spanish play El Chico de la Última Fila. At its core, it follows a gifted university student and a down-and-out male teacher caught in a dangerous game. Simply put, the male teacher discovers that in his class there is a student named Lee Kang who is especially good at writing essays. The things this kid writes are not made up. They are all diary entries about secretly watching the family next door. At first, the teacher simply thought the boy had talent. He encouraged him to keep observing and recording. But the deeper it went, the more it spiraled out of control. The teacher himself also became captivated by the story and started helping the student spy on the neighbors together. He even taught him how to sneak into other people's homes. But this student was no pushover. On the surface, he obeyed. In reality, he was using the teacher's desires. Step by step, he dragged the teacher down with him. At first, the teacher only wanted to enjoy watching the drama next door, but his own backyard caught fire first. His family and career were completely ruined. The final twist was shocking. You think the student was getting revenge on the teacher, but his whole plan was actually to avenge himself. He turned the teacher into a sacrifice for his creation. One of the series' biggest strengths is Choi Min-sik's performance as Heo Mun-oh. He portrayed a middle-aged man going from pride and curiosity to twisted breakdown in a very realistic way. One final reminder, the series deliberately centers on morally compromised characters, so the discomfort is very much part of the point. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it, and subscribe for more psychological thrillers and crime stories. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.